At Thanksgiving dinner, my father said, "We're not going to babysit your kids anymore. They're too much unlike your sister's well-behaved children," after I spent months fixing their house for free. I stood up, my hands trembling as the weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. The entire table went silent. My 8-year-old daughter Emily looked confused, while my 6-year-old son, Ben's eyes started filling with tears. After everything I had sacrificed, after 2 months of grueling renovation work that saved them thousands of dollars, this was how they repaid me. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. I had been a widower for 3 years, raising my children alone while juggling a demanding career as a project manager at a construction company. When my parents asked me to renovate their new house, I didn't hesitate. Every evening after work, every weekend, I was there laying floors, fixing plumbing, rewiring electrical systems, and repainting rooms. My hands were permanently stained with paint and calloused from manual labor. I had asked for one thing in return: occasional babysitting when I needed it most. Not daily care, not even weekly, just emergency backup, when work demands conflicted with school events, or when I was called to job sites unexpectedly. But sitting there, watching my sister Rachel smirk while my parents compared my children unfavorably to hers, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about babysitting anymore. This was about respect, about recognizing my worth and my children's value. I had been thinking like a grateful son, but I needed to start thinking like the strategic professional I was. In construction project management, you learn to assess situations quickly, identify leverage points, and execute decisive action when partners breach agreements. My mind began calculating rapidly. Over the past 2 months, I had documented everything for potential tax deductions: $8,000 worth of flooring materials, $3,200 in plumbing fixtures, $2,500 for electrical components, plus approximately 280 hours of skilled labor that would have cost them at least $25,000 if they had hired professionals. I had receipts, photographs of the work progress, and even text messages where they had praised my craftsmanship. More importantly, I still had the keys to their house and several unfinished projects that would be costly disasters if left incomplete. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I processed this information. My Aunt Linda was staring at my parents with obvious disapproval. My Uncle Mark shook his head and muttered something about ungrateful. Even my grandmother looked embarrassed by their behavior. The family dynamics were shifting in real time, and I could sense that others were recognizing the unfairness of the situation. I looked directly at my father and said calmly, "Really? I'll stop fixing your house." The words came out steady, but I could see the immediate panic flash across both my parents' faces. My mother quickly tried to backtrack, but I was already standing up. "Thank you for a great Thanksgiving dinner," I said, gathering my children's coats. "We're leaving." As we walked to the car, Emily asked, "Dad, why were Grandma and Grandpa being mean about us?" I knelt down to her level and chose my words carefully. "Sometimes adults make mistakes and say things they shouldn't, but you and Ben are wonderful exactly as you are." Ben sniffled and asked if we would see them again soon. "We'll see," I replied, already knowing that any future relationship would be entirely on my terms. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in my home office and began strategic planning. My background in construction project management had taught me that successful outcomes required thorough preparation, clear documentation, and understanding all parties' leverage points. I had been approaching this family relationship with emotional loyalty instead of professional strategy. That was about to change. First, I reviewed my financial position. As a senior project manager earning $85,000 annually, plus consulting income from weekend projects, I was financially stable. I had $45,000 in savings, a paid-off house worth $280,000, and no debt except a low-interest mortgage. More importantly, I had built a reputation in the local construction industry over 15 years. I knew every major contractor, supplier, and building inspector in the region. My professional network was extensive and highly regarded. My parents, on the other hand, were retired on fixed incomes. My father's pension provided about $3,200 monthly, and my mother's Social Security added another $1,800. They had purchased the house as a renovation project, specifically because they couldn't afford to hire professionals for the extensive work it required. Without my free labor, they would need to spend their limited retirement savings or take on debt to complete the necessary repairs. I had several strategic advantages they didn't realize. First, I understood the house's systems intimately after 2 months of intensive work. There were critical projects half finished that would cause expensive damage if not completed properly. The electrical work in the basement was partially rewired, but not connected to the main panel, creating potential fire hazards. The plumbing in the master bathroom was torn apart, with new fixtures installed, but not properly sealed. The hardwood floors in the living room were sanded and stained, but not sealed, making them vulnerable to water damage and scratches. Second, I had professional relationships with every contractor they would need to hire. Word travels fast in the construction industry, and my reputation carried significant weight. If they tried to hire someone else, contractors would likely ask me about the situation, or mention that they were taking over my work. Third, I had detailed knowledge of building codes and permit requirements that they lacked. Several of the modifications I had made required formal inspections that hadn't been scheduled yet. The next morning brought 52 missed calls from my parents. When I finally answered, my mother was nearly hysterical. "John, you need to come over right now," she demanded. I kept my voice calm and professional. "What's the emergency?" She couldn't articulate one, just insisted I come over immediately. When my father got on the phone, his tone was controlled but tense. "Just come, John. We need to talk." I knew exactly what this was about, but I also knew that emotional reactions would weaken my position. Instead, I told them I would be there in an hour, giving myself time to prepare. I gathered all my documentation, receipts for materials, photographs of the work in progress, copies of text messages praising my work, and a detailed list of unfinished projects with estimated costs if left incomplete. I also prepared a mental script to keep the conversation focused on facts rather than emotions. When I arrived, the scene was exactly what I expected. My mother was pacing frantically, my father stood with his arms crossed in defensive posture, and Rachel was positioned on the couch like she was mediating a corporate negotiation. They launched into their argument immediately. "John, don't you think you overreacted?" my mother began. My father jumped in with, "We're sorry if we hurt your feelings, but you can't just refuse to finish the house because of this." I let them talk for a moment, then responded with systematic clarity. "Let me understand this correctly. You called my children a burden, said they were too much for you to handle, compared them unfavorably to Rachel's children in front of everyone at dinner. And now, when I say I won't continue doing free work for you, I'm the problem?" The room went quiet. My mother put her hand to her chest, as if I had personally attacked her. "That's not fair, John. We've done a lot for you. We took care of your kids for years." This was the opening I needed to establish the true balance of our relationship. "Let's talk about what each of us has contributed," I said, pulling out my phone to reference my notes. Over the past 2 months, I have personally installed $8,000 worth of flooring, $3,200 in plumbing fixtures, and $2,500 in electrical components. I have provided approximately 280 hours of skilled labor that would cost $25,000 if you hired professionals. In exchange, you have occasionally watched my children when I specifically requested it, maybe 15 times total over the past year. Rachel unexpectedly spoke up. "Mom, Dad, you really shouldn't compare the kids like that. It's not about being right or wrong, you just shouldn't have said it in front of the children. It's not okay." This surprised everyone, including me. For the first time, my parents looked genuinely taken aback. My mother blinked at her in confusion. "You don't think we were right?" Rachel shrugged. "It's not about being right, you just shouldn't have said it in front of the kids." My father tried to regain control of the conversation. "John, we just want this to be over. You're not going to cut us off over something so small." I looked at him directly and said, "Watch me." The finality in my voice made my mother gasp, as if I had threatened to put her in a nursing home. As I gathered my children's belongings from their closets, my mother made one final attempt at emotional manipulation. "John, you're being selfish." I paused at the door. "Selfish? After 2 months of free labor, after bending over backwards to help you, after never complaining about all the times you needed something from me, I'm selfish? You want my time, my effort, my energy, but the second I need something, it's suddenly too much for you." I turned around to face them one last time. You don't have to babysit anymore, but I don't have to fix your house either. Then I walked out, knowing that this was only the beginning of a much longer strategic campaign. The next few weeks unfolded exactly as I had predicted. First came the attempts to force my return through guilt trips. My mother left voicemails with the typical, "We're getting old, John. We won't be around forever," manipulation tactics. My father sent long text messages about family loyalty and how I was being unreasonable over a minor misunderstanding. When guilt failed, they tried bargaining. My mother called, offering to resume babysitting if I finished the house. My father texted that they would be willing to help with the kids if I came over to talk things out. I ignored every attempt. A week after Thanksgiving, I received a text from my father that actually made me laugh out loud. "John, we forgive you. Can you come finish the house this weekend?" The audacity was remarkable. They were forgiving me for their behavior and expecting me to return to free labor immediately. I didn't even respond. That's when they deployed Rachel as their negotiator. She called one evening and started with casual conversation about my children and work, then casually mentioned, "You know, maybe you should just finish the house. They're being stubborn, but it's probably easier if you just get it done." I actually laughed. "So I do free labor, and in return they insult my kids, and you think I'm the one who should back down?" She paused. "I mean, it's their house, John. They're just stuck in their ways. You know how they are." "I do know how they are. That's exactly why I'm not doing it," I replied. She sighed. "Look, I get it, okay? But they're never going to admit they were wrong. They're parents." That statement revealed everything. She knew they were wrong, but expected me to accept disrespect because of their parental status. I told her I had to go and hung up. That night, I made a strategic decision that would prove crucial later. I blocked their phone numbers. I was done with manipulation attempts and ready to let natural consequences take their course. 2 days later, Rachel showed up at my house unexpectedly, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable. "We need to talk," she said. I led her inside and waited for her to explain. She sat at my kitchen table and sighed deeply. "They called a contractor. This was interesting news, but I remained neutral. Good, so they finally got someone to do it." Her expression darkened. "Yeah, but there's a problem. They got scammed." I blinked in surprise. "Dad hired some guy off Facebook because he was cheaper than a real company, paid him up front, and now he's gone, took the money, and disappeared." I couldn't help it. I actually laughed. Rachel shot me a disapproving look. "John, they lost $10,000. $10,000. I stopped laughing immediately. "Wait, where did they even get that much money?" She looked uncomfortable. "They borrowed some of it from family." This was getting interesting. "Who?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "Uncle Mark, Aunt Linda, even Grandma." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. They had borrowed money from extended family members to avoid acknowledging they needed me, and now they were $10,000 in debt with a half-finished house and no contractor. The irony was perfect. "That's not my problem," I said simply. Rachel nodded slowly. "I know, and I told them that." This surprised me. "You what?" She exhaled. "I told them they should have just apologized to you, that they did this to themselves." For the first time in this entire situation, I felt a shift in family dynamics. Rachel, their favorite and golden child, had actually defended my position. She leaned forward. "John, they're desperate. They want you to come back, but they're still being stubborn. They know they messed up." I crossed my arms, curious where this was leading. She shrugged. "And I think you should make them beg." Hearing Rachel say that completely changed my perspective on the situation. She had always been their favorite, the one they praised and supported unconditionally. Now she was telling me to make them beg. "You really think they'll do that?" I asked. She flashed a half smile. "They don't have a choice." For the first time in my life, I felt truly in control of the family dynamic. I leaned back in my chair. "So, what exactly do they want from me?" She exhaled. "They want you to come over and talk." I laughed. "Yeah, I've heard that before." She nodded. "I know, but this time they're not in control. You are." She was absolutely right. I had all the leverage now. They were in debt, had a half-finished house with potential safety hazards, no contractor, and had borrowed money from family members who would eventually want explanations. Meanwhile, I was financially stable, professionally secure, and completely free of their manipulative demands. I didn't go that day or the next day. I let them sit with their problems and truly understand the consequences of their choices. A few days later, my mother broke down and sent a rambling text that was part apology and part excuse. "We may have been unfair and shouldn't have said what we did, but you also overreacted. We should have handled things differently, but you also overreacted." Even in desperation, they had to assign partial blame to me. I genuinely laughed reading it and ignored the message completely. Then my father tried with a simple message. "John, we need you. Come back and finish the house. We'll figure everything else out later." No apologies, just acknowledgement that they needed me. I ignored that too. The next night, Rachel called with an update. "Okay, I think they're actually breaking this time." "What happened?" I asked. "They told me to tell you they're sorry." I blinked in surprise. "Wait, they actually said that?" She paused. "Well, they told me to tell you, not in those exact words, but close enough." Then she said something that truly surprised me. "They asked if I thought you'd never speak to them again." That made me pause. For the first time, I realized they were genuinely terrified, not just about the house, but that they had pushed me too far and might lose me permanently. Honestly, they had. I agreed to meet with them, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted to hear them acknowledge their mistakes directly. I told Rachel I would come over on my terms, when I was ready. When I finally walked into their house, they looked defeated. My mother had been crying, and my father looked exhausted. I sat down, crossed my arms, and waited. Finally, my father sighed. "We messed up, John." That was as close to an apology as I was going to get from him. He continued explaining how they hadn't meant to hurt me, were frustrated and stressed about the house, and had spoken inappropriately. Then my mother spoke quietly. "We love you and the kids." For the first time, I actually believed her. I waited for them to finish, then delivered my final position. "I'm not finishing your house." My mother looked like I had slapped her. My father tensed up. "John," he started, but I cut him off. "You had 2 months of free labor from me. You had help whenever you needed it, and the one thing I asked for in return was too much for you. Now I'm done. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not fixing your house." The room was completely silent. My mother looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. My father stared at the table. Rachel just watched. Then I stood up and delivered my final terms. "But I'm willing to move forward if you stop treating me like I owe you something, if you stop treating my kids like they're less than Rachel's, and if you understand that from now on, if I help you, it's because I want to, not because you expect it." They agreed because they had no other choice. I left that day feeling like I had finally won. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely liberated from their expectations and manipulation. The relationship didn't magically improve overnight. My parents weren't suddenly different people, and I wasn't naive enough to believe they wouldn't test boundaries again. But something fundamental had changed. They realized I wasn't going to be their on-call handyman, backup plan, or safety net anymore. They were genuinely afraid because they knew I was prepared to walk away permanently. For several weeks, there were no unnecessary phone calls or guilt trips, just silence. It was almost peaceful. Then one afternoon, I received a text from my mother. "Can we take the kids this weekend? We miss them." I stared at the message for a moment. This was the same woman who had called them a burden and compared them unfavorably to Rachel's children. Had she suddenly missed them? I decided to ask my children directly. "Do you want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's this weekend?" Emily crossed her arms. "Are they going to be weird again?" I was honest. "Maybe." Ben looked hesitant. They thought about it. Then Emily shrugged. "I guess we can go." So I texted back. "Sure, I'll drop them off at 5. My parents were different that weekend. My mother was overly nice, trying too hard to prove she wasn't the villain. My father was quiet but attentive. Before I left, my father pulled me aside. "We really love them, John. We just messed up." It wasn't a full apology, but for my father, it was as close as I was going to get. I nodded. "Good, then don't mess up again." Later that night, Rachel called with information that explained everything. "I have to tell you something Mom told me about why she really stopped babysitting." I sat up straight. "Because they were tired, right?" She paused. "No, that wasn't it. At least not the whole reason." I frowned. "What was it?" She took a deep breath. They were jealous, John. I blinked. Jealous of what? She paused. Of you. Of how much the family supported you at Thanksgiving. Of how close you are with your children. Of how you became the center of attention when they're used to it being me. That revelation was stunning. My parents weren't just tired of babysitting, they were bitter because I had been recognized as the responsible, caring son. And they resented losing their position as the family's central figures. It was petty, sad, and reinforced that they would never truly change. I didn't tell my parents what Rachel had revealed. It wouldn't have changed anything, but I modified how I handled them from that point forward. Everything was on my terms. When they wanted to see the children, only if my kids wanted to go. If they needed help with something, they had to ask, not assume. And if they ever disrespected my children again, that would be it, no more chances. The best part was that they knew it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just their son, I was someone they needed to respect. And that dynamic shift was worth everything. For several months, everything remained polite and controlled. My parents were on their best behavior, careful not to push boundaries or make demands. It was almost as if they had finally learned their lesson until they proved they hadn't. Aunt Linda called me one Sunday afternoon. John, did you see what your mom posted on Facebook? Those words never preceded good news. I opened the app and found a long, dramatic post from my mother about how family members should always help each other and how some people forget where they came from. After everything we've done, it's heartbreaking to see our own son turn his back on us, she had written. She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The post concluded, "At least we still have our amazing daughter who never left us." That was it. I was completely done with their manipulation attempts. Instead of calling or texting her, I wrote a public response directly on her post. "You're right, Mom. Family should help each other. That's why I spent 2 months fixing your house for free while you sat in your apartment. That's why I asked for nothing in return except that you treat my kids with basic respect. And when you called them a burden and compared them to Rachel's children, I realized that you don't want a family, you want servants. And I'm not playing that role anymore." I hit submit and watched the response unfold in real time. The first comment came from Uncle Mark. "Wow, I didn't know the whole story. This is messed up." Then Aunt Linda. "John is right. You took advantage of him. He gave you everything and you repaid him by insulting his children. Unbelievable." Then my grandmother, the one who had loaned them money. "You told me you needed money because John refused to help, but you never told me why. Now I see the truth." Comment after comment supported my position, but the best one came from Rachel. "I love Mom and Dad, but John is telling the truth. They treated him unfairly, and he has every right to walk away." My golden sister, the one they had always favored and supported, publicly refused to defend them. I sat back and watched my parents' reputations crumble in real time. About an hour later, the post was deleted. My mother tried calling, but I didn't answer. She texted. "Was that necessary?" I responded. "Was your post necessary?" She didn't reply. A few days later, my father finally surrendered completely. He sent a simple text. "We were wrong, we're sorry. No excuses, no blame shifting, no conditions." It was exactly what I had needed to hear months earlier. I never worked on their house again. They had to hire legitimate contractors at full price, costing them nearly $30,000 to complete what I would have finished for free. They struggled to repay the borrowed money to family members, straining those relationships permanently. Uncle Mark and Aunt Linda remained cordial but distant, while my grandmother made it clear she felt deceived about the true circumstances. Rachel maintained her support for my position and became the family mediator, helping our parents understand their mistakes without excusing their behavior. Most importantly, they never compared my children to Rachel's children again, because they knew that would be the last time they saw them. Emily and Ben now visit their grandparents on their own terms, with clear boundaries established, and my parents treat them with the respect they should have shown from the beginning. I had successfully established boundaries, demanded respect, and created lasting consequences for their behavior, transforming our family dynamic permanently.